All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. In the next hour, Pete, Blois, and I want to give you a little bit of a sneak preview of the things we've been working on in Blend for the last year since we shipped Blend 3 in July last year. There's a lot more to Blend 4 than we can really show in 1 hour, but luckily we do have a beta available for you to download that you can explore yourself and that you can play with. And also a little later this year we're going to have an official launch event, and we're going to show you something there that you haven't seen in the beta. So there will be interesting things to see all year round. Just want to point to a couple of other sessions that you might find interesting in connection with Blend and Windows Phone and design. We have a session on Sketchflow specifically, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Sketchflow in this session. On Wednesday with Chris Bernard, I've seen the material for that, and I think this will be a great session. So if you're interested in Sketchflow, that's the place to be. Also, Kenny Young, who's an architect on the Blend team, will talk about fluid layout and the dynamic layout animations and layout morphing features we have in Blend in a special session, specifically also on Wednesday. So, before I want to start with demos, I'd just like to start with a very, very quick recap of what is Blend, not assuming that everybody here knows Blend inside out. Blend is basically a compositing system for user experiences. It's basically a tool that blends content creation, styling, layout, animation, designing for and with data, and building interactivity in one single integrated environment. It is also very much a workflow solution that is very tightly integrated with Visual Studio and provides a very good designer-developer workflow. So you can open the same solution at the same time in Visual Studio and in Blend and work together on the same content without ever having to convert things. And more importantly, we also have the right abstractions in Blend to give developers and designers the right interfaces to work together. For example, concepts such as custom controls, such as styled controls, things like behaviors, like data interfaces and data models that enable developers to create the models that you can design against very efficiently. Also, we have a content pipeline integration with the Adobe Creative Suite tools. We have a very powerful Photoshop importer that lets you import multi-layer Photoshop comps and Adobe Illustrator graphics. So there are many, many ways how you can integrate Blend into an efficient workflow. Finally, Blend also comes with Sketchflow. Sketchflow is our prototyping system built into Blend that makes it really easy to create deep, dynamic, and interactive prototypes of user experiences. So we're going to have 4 demos today. The first one is a little introduction to Blend for Windows Phone. You have seen a little bit of that in the keynote, and I'm going to go a little bit into more pieces of that. Then we're going to talk a little bit about designer-developer workflow things, specifically, like following the Ready for Business pillar of Silverlight 4. Finally, we're going to show you a few more creative capabilities and creative new options that we have in Blend with a new take on layout. And finally, Pete Blois is going to show you some real cool demos for game design on Windows Phone. So with that, I'll be done with slides, and let's go to demos. So we are starting with an empty Blend 4 here without anything, and the first thing we want to do is we want to create a new project. And the first thing that is new when you open Blend 4 with the preview tools for Windows Phone installed is that you see new project templates. You now have project templates for Windows Phone, and if we just pick one of these, we get a brand new, fresh Windows Phone project. Let me close my results pane, and I'm not quite having enough resolution here, so let's just bring that down a little bit. Okay. So here you have basically a Windows Phone application coming right up in the middle of my artboard. And let me just switch off the adorners for a second. You see that basically we have the phone chrome around it, so you can see how that thing would actually look like in form factor on your phone. And there's one other new thing, that you can now actually switch the orientation of your little phone on your screen between portrait and landscape, because of course, in many cases you want to build applications that deal with either resolution effectively. Now, the artboard, and that's really important about Blend for Phone, is really pretty much the same that you have when you author things for Silverlight. Really, all the features work pretty much the way you want. So you can just go here and, select some text and write, hello mix. So you have in-place editing. You can go, write demo. And of course, you have access to all the controls that Blend comes from. So for example, I can create a button, or I can create, like a checkbox, and so on and so on. So all these things are there. Let's make a slider. But one thing that you probably notice as I'm doing that is, hey, these things don't look like normal Silverlight controls. That is because on the design surface, we're basically showing you the controls with the appropriate styling for Windows Phone. So we're using exactly the right style so that you're in accordance with the style guides. But of course, you still can go and create your own custom styling if you like to. There's nothing different than anywhere else in Blend. So you can still go and create your custom skins if that's what you'd like to do. Let's get rid of these things. What I want to do in this demo is I want to show you a little bit how to build a data-driven application and how to design, like a data-driven application. And very often as a designer, when you start with things like that, you don't really have any data sources because you're just designing things. And so Blend comes with that feature called sample data that lets you create mock-up data you can design against very, very easily on the fly, and that you as a designer can then later go and replace with a real data source when your developer gives you one. So let's just do that. We create new sample data. Let's call that products. And let's just create a couple of things. The first property here we're going to call name. The next one I'm going to call description. Create another one called image. And finally one called website. So something real simple. Now the important thing with sample data is that I can go and configure the way how my sample data looks like. So for example, let's start with images. I can just go and change the type of this image column to image and just pick a folder of images that I want to use. And Blend will basically import these images and use them as sample data. For my name, by default, all text columns are just lorem ipsum text, and you can configure how the lorem ipsum text looks like. So for example, I can say I just want to have one word, and I can have words that are very short or words that are longer. So I just want to have one word for the name. And for my description, I also want a string, but here I want a lorem ipsum string that is considerably longer, like 64, like that. For my website, though, I want something that looks more, like something else. So we have string formats, for example, for things like company names or addresses or times. So we get basically prepared sample data that looks right so that you get actually the right look in your app. So in this case, I want a website URL. Once I've done that and once I've configured my sample data, I can just take these things and just drag these over onto my design surface, and Blend basically creates a list box. And I can now go and, let's resize this so that it fits in here. And I have a fully working list box that shows, like a thumbnail and a name for the product, but it doesn't look quite right. And I want to show you how easy it is in Blend to actually style your data so that it looks the way you want. So I'm just editing the template for that. And the first thing, because this is an interface for a phone, that I want to do is I want to have some more spacing so, that these things aren't quite as close together. The images should probably be a little bit bigger, so I can just pick the image and resize that. Let's make that roughly 100. And the stack panel, I really would like these things to be side by side, like that. Pick the text block and add some spacing here, and just give it a little bit more of a style. We have basically predefined resources from the Windows style guide, from the Windows Phone style guide here. So if I want to have, like a text that matches the size of that, I can just apply the style to it and I get automatically the right size. So that's my list box, looks about right the way I wanted it. And now I want to see some details. When I select something from this list box, I want to be able to show some details. Now the problem, of course, is on the phone screen, everything is full. I don't have any more space, so I really need to move away this list somehow. And to do that, I can just simply create some transitions and do that and make some space. And to do the transitions, I use the visual state feature in Blend. So I'm adding a state group. I'm calling that views. And in the state group, I add two states, one state for my list and one state for my details, which I have to create later. So just to show you what I want to do, I'm going to go here to my transform area, and I can just start, like, for example, doing a perspective transform here. But as you can see, this doesn't look quite like the transitions on the phone because really the center of rotation is not quite in the right spot. So let me just, correct that. So I could set that wherever I want, but it really needs to be at 0. And now I can, properly build, my transitions. And the way I do that is I go to my detailed state, and for the detailed state, I just move this list out of the way to roughly like, oops, like that. And let's give it a little bit of transparency at the same time. And now we can actually look at this transition. I can just switch on transition preview, give it some time, like for example a second, and I can basically see how when I switch between these two states, list state and detailed state, my list basically animates out of the way. So far so good. Next step, create the details. To do that I go back to base and I switch off the list box for a second so that it's not in our way. I go back to data and I switch my data pane to details mode. I pick the data fields that I want and just drag them over into the design surface. Blend now automatically creates a little data grid that basically shows you how the things should look like. Make that a little bigger, and let's just design that a little bit so that it looks nice. First I want to get rid of these labels. I don't really need these. I want to put the image here to the side, put the URL here at the bottom, put the title up here, and the big description text box here. Let's make the description text box so that it wraps, so that we actually see, oops, sorry, wrong, here, so that it wraps, so that we see the text, and just add some style here to this text so that it looks a little better. Okay, here we go. And now currently the grid with the detail is actually in front of the list box. That's not really what I want, so I'm just dragging this here in place where I want it and switch the list box back on. And now I can actually try out my transition again, and you can now see what actually happens when this transition will happen in the real application between details mode and list mode. The next step that I want to do is to add some interactivity, because of course I would really like as a designer to actually build this app so that it works. And this is where behaviors come in. Behaviors are basically pre-packaged building blocks of interactivity that you as a designer can just apply with drag and drop. Developers can write custom behaviors, although we ship Blend with a big set of useful things. But it's always possible to write custom things to provide your own vocabulary of interactivity that designers can use and configure without actually having to write code. In this case, what I want is, when somebody selects an item in the list box, I want to switch to this other state that shows the details. And for that, I use a go-to-state action, and I just drag that onto my list box. Now, by default, this fires on a mouse left-down event. That's not really what I want, so I'm picking a selection changed event. And the state I want to go to is details. In order to go back, I will also pick another go-to-state action and just drag it here on my header and set this to go back to the list. And now we're ready to actually run the application, so I can hit F5 and Blend will build this and now ask me, hey, do you want to run this application in the emulator or do you want to run this application on the phone device? I don't have a device, so I run it in the emulator. And here it is. And here comes my application, and here you go. So I can now basically scroll over this list. I can select an item in this list, and as I select the item, it will actually switch. And you see the transitions running exactly in the same way in the emulator as it was running on the design surface. So really, really easy to basically design applications for the phone, data-driven applications. As a designer, you can really begin like mocking up things and making them work the way you want and style them the way you need. So much for this first demo. In the next demo, let me actually, I don't need the emulator anymore, and I need to start another copy of Blend. In the next demo, I want to show you a little bit more about designer-developer workflow. As I said earlier, we did a lot of work in Blend 4 to make Blend work better in complicated and complex real-world development scenarios. Where you very often don't actually get to design everything from scratch, but where you really have developers who provide, like a data model business logic that really your job as a designer it is to create a user experience for. So in these cases, in Blend 3, we didn't quite have as many capabilities as we have now, and I want to show you how easy it is now to design actually user experience for existing business logic. Let me start this application here. Let me load this project. This is a little Sketchflow project, a little prototype for a vocabulary training application. Let me just make a little bit more space here. So what you see here at the bottom, because it's a Sketchflow application, is like the Sketchflow map that defines the navigation of the application and the composition of the application. And up here you see a couple of screens that I'm working with. And what I want to build in this case is I want to build a vocabulary quiz screen. So I'm starting here with a completely empty one. And in this case, I had a designer to actually create a partial comp for this screen in Photoshop. So I want to use the Photoshop importer to bring this in. So let's find the Photoshop file. Here it is. And the Photoshop importer comes up. In the Photoshop importer here at the right, you see all the layers this graphics is made up. And you see here, for example, a vector layer. And the system asks me, hey, do you want to bring this in as editable content so that I can still edit it as a vector shape? Or do you want to bring it as a flattened bitmap? For text layer, we have the same things. Let me just find one. Here, for example, this is a text layer. And it, again, asks me, do you want this as editable content or as a flattened bitmap? I leave all that basically in the default settings. And I just bring that in. Let's create a new folder. And so here's the graphics as generated in Photoshop. Now, the data model for this application was basically given to me by a developer, and it's really not that complicated. Basically, my data model is a list of exercises, and each exercise contains of lists of words that basically are the things that I'm trying to learn here in my vocabulary trainer. And how do I now get this data model into Blend so that I can design against? Well, in the data pane, similar to what we did before with sample data, I now have the ability to say create sample data from a class. So I can just pick this and just take the class that implements the data model, and Blend will now create basically a complete stand-in facade for this data model filled with sample data that I can design against. And later, or at runtime, you can very, very trivially replace that with a real data source. So you can really design against data even though you have a data model that is not typically accessible to you at design time. So to begin, so here's my list of exercises. Here's the current word that I'm working with, and down here is the list of words that I have. And the first thing I want to do is I want to create a list of exercises. So I just drag this name field in here, and this list is a little big, so I'm just going to drag that down here, move that in the right spot. And you can see that the sample data in here by default is also the lorem ipsum text that you've seen before, but for my exercise name I just want it to be one word, so I'm just shortening that a little bit. Now, the word that I want to translate is here from the source field from Word, and I can just drag that, oops, forgot one thing, need to go to details mode. To set up here my details, I take this source word, and that's the word we want to translate. Again, this sample data is a little bit too long, so let's make that shorter, like that. I also need the same exercise name here, so I'm going to drag that here as well. And then I have some statistics. How many attempts have I done to do this word? How many of these were correct? And how many of these were incorrect? Last thing I need is I need a field where I can enter the text, that I want to answer in my vocabulary quiz. So I'm just going to draw this as a text box in here. Let's just empty this and, oops. I just closed my property inspector. That was not intentional. Oh, I just docked it wrong. Sorry. Let me dock this back here. Let's go back and select the text box. Sorry for that. And just make this a little bigger. Okay. And we also need to data bind this text field to the input string I want to work with. And again, a little long, so it makes it shorter. Now I have basically all the data display, but of course, like in real-world business logic, it doesn't come just with data models. It typically also comes with application logic and the things you actually want to do, and you want to design against that so that you can actually see a working user interface. So we're having the same capability. If you look closely here in the data model, you don't just see data fields, but you also see fields that say in brackets behind method. So basically, in the data models we build, we also create stand-ins for all methods and command implementations that are there in the data model in the business logic so that you can bind against these things very, very easily. So I'm just creating a couple of buttons here to show that. One button to start the exercise, one button to check if the word I entered was correct, and oops, and one last button to move to the next word. Let me call this one start, this one check, and the last one next. Okay, now I can just drag these methods from my data model, from my business logic onto these things, like to say start, like to say check input, and there's one for next word. And that's really all I need to do to wire up this data model, this business logic against my actual screen. So we can now try this. So I'm hitting F5 to run this, and this app will come up in the browser. So building, now we're starting the web server in the background and bring up a browser. App is loading, and here it is. So we go to this new quiz page that we just created, and we can now select an exercise, and as I select the exercise, the name also appears over here. And I can start the exercise, so a word appears here, and I can type in something. I first type in something wrong, hit check, and you see it says tried once, but it was wrong. Now let's type in something correct. As you probably can guess from my accent, the language this is translating to is German. So I do that, and now I tried it twice, and this time was correct. Take another word. Let's do it correct now. So basically working. Now, clearly we don't have a lot of real fancy visual feedback here. So a next step, I just want to show you a couple of new visual features we have in Blend 4 that are a lot of fun. So let me get rid of this and just switch here to another screen. So let's say you have states and you have, a couple of images here that we want to switch in between in these states. In Blend 3, we had this ability to create state transitions, and these state transitions in cases like that always were basically fades. You can select easing functions, which is also something we already had in Blend 3, and you can just switch between these things. But what we added in Blend 4 is the ability to add transition effects. So I can do things like this now. Like in a video editor, I can add a transition effect. Let's add another one for this one here, just so that we can see more of that. And if I now do things, I get basically transitions on these things. So very, very cool visual effects. So we're shipping Blend with a number of these effects, but you can also add your own. So this is a very extensible mechanism. Now, practical use case. So what I did here in this little application is I added, this little thing here. I don't have time right now to build that, so I just pre-did that. I just added some transitions here to show, when it's correct, it becomes green, and when I add something that is wrong, I make it red. So using, again, these same transition effects. At the same time, I also added a dynamic layout effect that you will see in a second when I run the app. I'm not going to show you how to do that because Kenny is going to have a complete session on that on Wednesday. If you're interested in layout animation, I very much recommend that. So I go to my quiz, and look what happens when I now select an exercise. You see basically the data flying out from the list box and animating to the spot up there. This is this new fluid move behavior that we added to Blend 4 that lets you do real sophisticated animations very, very easily. And now let's again start an exercise. Okay, and let's type in something wrong, and you now see that it wiggles at me saying that I didn't do that quite so well. Or if I do it right, it will show me the transition like that. So a very simple example for how you can create great visuals, like with these type of functions. All right, so much for this demo. Hold on 1 second. No, I don't need this. In the next demo, let me just load a project before I explain you what I want to do. The next demo is a little bit more about a feature with very rich creative possibilities. Before I show you the demo, I want to give you a little bit of background on that. So one goal that we have in Expression Blend is to let you as a designer create things as directly and as visually as possible that you have in your head. So if you have an idea, an imagination, an inspiration in your head for something you want to design, you should be able to create it with designer-friendly tools, with the tools we give you, without having to enlist the help of a developer. Now, last Mix in a keynote, we've shown this example that you see here on screen. You see an early sketch of it here and the final finished version of that. And this whole example could basically be built completely without writing code, with one exception. And that exception was this radial layout that you see there. That is something where you needed to go to a developer and say, hey, write me a radial layout container that basically can handle, like layout in a circle. And if you think about it from a designer's point of view, that is kind of like embarrassing. It's not like from a designer's point of view, that laying out things in a circle is a particularly complex thing. I mean, designers have literally done that for millennia. Yet today we still, like if we want something that doesn't lay out in a straight list, we basically have to write code for it. And we thought, really, that's not a great idea. There must be a way to do that without writing code. And so in Blend 4, we're shipping a new layout container that basically lets you draw things like that, to basically do layouts like this and much more complicated things purely visually just by drawing stuff. Let me show you how that works. So let's go here to an empty screen and start by just drawing a circle. Okay, here I have one. Let's make this circle a little bit thicker. Whoops, not that thick. And a little bit greener. Oops, but not the fill. I wanted the stroke, sorry for that. Just so that it's not so... Oh, I'm sorry, I'm playing with the opacity mask. That was not really my intent. That's where I wanted to go. And let's go to our asset panel and pick the path list box. Okay, let's add one of these to the screen, and it's currently up there in the upper left corner, and it doesn't really matter where it is, and you will see in a second why it doesn't matter. Next thing I want to do is I want to create a shape. Shapes is another new thing in Blend 4. We added a whole bunch of parametric shapes you can use for things like arrows and other useful things that make it easy to draw certain things. And I'm just going to create an up arrow here quickly. So just draw this one here, and let's just fill this with red and make the stroke black of this guy. Okay. Now, I would like to lay out this arrow on this path. Well, nothing easier than that. I just pick my path list box, take my new element picker, and just pick this. So you see that this arrow now moves to that circle. That's not all that impressive, but let's add some more arrows to this list box. I'm just copying this and paste it in. So as I paste this in, you see that what Blend does here is basically takes these arrows, the children of the list box, and distributes them on this path. Okay? So now that I've done that, there's a whole lot of interesting things I can do with that. One thing is I can change how the orientation looks of these. So by switching the orientation between the default location and oriented along the normal of the path, you can basically see how these elements arrange themselves on the path. Another thing that I can do is I can basically say which part of the path I want to use for my layout. So for example, now I'm only using like 15% of this path, or now I'm using all of the path. If I use less than 100%, I can also change the start position where I want to have it. So there are lots of things that let me determine how I actually lay out things on a path. Another thing that I can do, obviously, is, by the way, I can't only do this with like things like arrows. I can also add buttons to this or any other element that I want. So it's pretty flexible. But in order to create the equivalent of this radial list box, I really need some text on that. So let's do some data binding. You've seen me do that before, so I have made a little sample data source here that just contains a bunch of little strings. And I data bind this. Oops, I'm in details mode. That's not desired. Let's do this. So what I did now is I basically added text to that, and so this text also arranges itself right along this path. But of course that still doesn't quite look like the radial list box, so let's go and edit our generated items template a little bit. So I go here and I pick my stack panel, and actually let's first pick the text block and make it a little bit bigger so that you guys can see that better down there. Let's make this 20 points. And now just add some rotation to the stack panel. And if I do that, you can see that I can create all kind of pretty cool things with that just by adjusting that the way I want. So that basically now is a fully working radial list box without any line of code, and it does a whole lot more than any standard code of a radial list box would ever do, mostly because all of the properties that you've seen here are fully animatable, and you can do some real cool things with that. And well, actually, let me show you that. Not only can you actually use a single path for it, you actually also can use multiple paths, and I'll show you that first, and then I show you some animation. So I actually added another path here to this page before. I just hid it so that I didn't have to deal with it. And let's actually move this path here a little bit out of the way. It's not very well positioned like that. By the way, if you see, if I move the path, all the layout actually moves with it, which is kind of like really cool. But let's add a second path to the whole thing. So I pick my path list box and I go add, and I pick this path. And now you see that basically a few overflow items fell from the previous list box onto from the previous path onto the second path. And I have the same options for this one. So again, I can change the orientation if I want, or I can change, what span I want to use, and so on. But as I said earlier, I can also animate all that stuff. So let's create a storyboard and just do some animation. So I actually already animated this path here before, so you can see what happens. Let's also animate the properties of that. So for example, animate the span here 200, and while we're at it, let's also animate the circle a little bit. Yeah, good enough. So if I play this, basically all these layout things are basically completely animatable, as you can see. So there are lots of fun things that you can actually do with that. Let me show you a couple of other scenarios what you can do with that. I assume that many of you guys who have been working with Silverlight really miss motion path in Silverlight. Well, you can actually use path list box to simulate motion path. So what I have here is I have a little path list box that contains this single arrow, and I have this spiral path here. So all I need to do is I take my path list box and pick this spiral path. And now I did something wrong. Oops, I selected the wrong element. That was not intended. Sorry, I'm not picking very well here. Yeah, now we go. And let's orient that again to the path. And let's see what happens when I'm moving my start parameter. Well, the object just moves along the path. And as I told you earlier, all these things are animatable. So I can go to my storyboard, just go here, let's say, to 2 seconds, and set the start to the end. And if I now run this animation, you basically have this object nicely following the path and back, because I did some auto reverse here. Let's set an easing function to make this look nicer, like a cubic ease on this keyframe. And you actually get a real nice accelerating and decelerating path animation. So real easy thing to do. Thank you very much, and there's more. So here I have a little path, and I have a text box. When you data bind a text box or any sort of string to a list box, basically every character becomes an item in the list. Now, let's see what effect that has. So let's pick the path list box and data bind the selected item, the item source, sorry, not the selected item. By the way, here's another cool new feature in Blend. We now have this element picker, so instead of using the data binding dialog for binding data elements, I can just pick this and then just pick the element I want to bind to. Oops, that didn't quite work. Let me do this again. Hey. I had this problem before, I'm not sure. Oh, I know why, because I didn't add the path to this, sorry. So after adding the path to this, what you now see is that every character appeared there on this path. This is not very easy to see, so I prepared a different style for that makes it easier to see that. Let me go to the list box and just apply a template that I pre-created. Oops, sorry, my fault. Sorry. Here I wanted to go, sorry for that. So now I have it a little bit bigger. So what that gives you, it basically gives you text layout on a path. Again, I can do this and basically make that orient towards the path and use some animation here of the path. So basically you can get animated text on a path using that feature. Let me show you a couple of use cases from a real designer for that whole thing. I have some samples here that our designer Celso created. Here it is, sorry. I should have opened that before, my fault. Okay, first thing I want to show you is basically the circular list box, but this time done completely without code. So as I move over these things, you see basically these things highlight, you see the image in the middle change. This is now done completely with path layout, no code involved at all on the side of the designer. Let me show you another example. Here's text on a path in action. So basically, you have the text actually, and this is exactly the same path that is here, the waves, but just using a transform, it's offset a little bit from the actual path itself. So you can easily do things like that. And another path is used to just have this object, this little fish, move along the path. Let me show you a little bit more sophisticated example. In motion graphics, people very often use these replicator effects where you take an object and you replicate it multiple times, like through array copies or circular copies or things like that. And you can very easily use path list box to do that. So if I run this animation here, you basically get these objects flying out of the center and get increasing blur effect applied as we go outwards. And this is really just 4 path list boxes that are animated and that do that stuff. So this can be created in Blend in a few minutes very, very easily. Show you another example. This is a little data visualization. This is a graph how much it rains in Seattle, and you don't want to look at that. It's scary. So basically what we're doing here is we're animating these objects along the path. There's basically a path list box where we're again animating the start properties, and there are shapes involved, some of our custom parametric shapes, and you get this beautiful, these beautiful animations, when the data is actually coming in along that path. Again, that's something that would require significant code to write if you didn't have path list box. With path list box, it's totally trivial to create. And I think, and here's just one other example, like just for a more traditional, like list box-like scenario where you basically just do selection of a list, like within something. So you see there's a lot of things you can do with path list box, and it's really something, like every time I play with it, I come up with new ideas what you can do with it. It's a lot of fun and a lot of creativity, lots of creative options. So that was the 3rd demo, and now we get to the 4th demo, and I'd like to introduce Pete Blois, who's a program manager on our team, and he has created some great gaming demos with Blend 4.
Hey, Christian. Sorry. Hold on. Okay, so I'm here to talk about using Expression Blend to design games as well as user interfaces. We've seen a lot about UI, but there's also a lot of fun things that you can do with Blend with games. For this, I'm actually using, this is my first game that I made for Windows Phone. It was actually my first application that I made for Windows Phone. I wanted to play around with, I wanted to make an application, and I had a couple components laying around, so I wanted to make basically a fun game. So I ended up making basically a labyrinth-style game. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but it's one of those things that basically where you tilt your device and you try to control a ball going through a maze. So what I built this with, what I started with, was essentially there's a couple open source physics engines. So I just used the Box2D open source physics engine. It's available in a bunch of languages from C# to ActionScript to C++. So I just used like the desktop C# physics engine. Works fine unmodified on Silverlight and on Windows Phone. And then basically have adapters that I've used a couple times. I don't know if you guys have seen me demo in the past. I've demoed them before. Basically adapters that basically take behaviors so that you can drag drop behaviors onto elements and basically makes them into physics elements. Another technique that I use quite a bit is basically subclassing. So I can subclass a body control, and then that basically makes the object act like a physics object. Using those components, and then using a bunch of styling and a little bit of blend that we can actually make like some sort of interesting levels. So I'm going to switch over to the other machine and actually show and hold on. Okay. Let me actually show like basically the level of the game. This was actually, it was pretty quick to make, just a pretty boring level. But this is essentially what I'm doing is I'm just running this level in the emulator. I'm using the mouse to simulate the accelerometer in the emulator, but when you're actually running on the real device, it runs with real accelerometer. Basically, you need to like navigate around and try to avoid the holes. If you get into the hole, then it restarts at the beginning. So basically inside of Blend, all that it does is it hooks up the accelerometer when you tilt the device to the physics engine gravity and makes the things move around. So let's add a little bit of content here. I got a blank level, and we got to put some stuff in it. So I'm just going to draw out an ellipse, and then we can take something called the body behavior, and when I attach this to ellipse, it's going to put it under control of the physics engine. And there's a couple of parameters that you can do that you can specify for it, such as how fast it will move, things like that. And I can also do something interesting. Like I'll just take a random rectangle and I can essentially apply a motor to make it rotate. In physics engine terminology, that's called like revolute joint behavior. I don't know. Let's actually see this run. Cool. So now we have a ball moving around and let's see, and it actually hits things. That's all pretty straightforward. But when I'm actually doing games, you know, I really want to package these things together into reusable components that I can code against and that I can really add a lot more functionality. The other way of actually adding elements basically into a physics engine, or the other way that I actually use very often in games, is templated controls. A good example of a templated control here is I have like walls. So if you want a wall, then you can just drag one out. And basically, you can design your level however you want. I use templated controls very often in games just because basically what they offer is very loose binding between the visuals and the actual code behind. So I can replace the visuals without having to replace the class or change any code or anything like that. And with this engine, basically the visuals define how the shape of the object. So like a square wall, that's sort of square. So let's get something, let's make something a little bit different. So I'll just edit copy of template. And this is all vectors running in Silverlight. And so what I can do is I can actually modify this. I just have a rectangle with a fill on it, and I can convert this rectangle into a path. And let's see, and modify this path, give it like a little bit of a bow, give it like a little bit of an arc to it. These are vectors, hardware accelerated drop shadows running on the phone, all really cool. Makes it so it's very fast and easy for me to actually edit this stuff, and very easy to make like random games. We also need some obstacles in here, some holes. Oh, actually, I want to show you like what is actually going on in the wall. It's not that crazy of code, so let's actually look at this class. The class is, let's see, oh, wrong key. So the class is, sorry, I hit F5 by mistake. The class just drives from body control, says is static, you know, walls, they don't really move, and says visuals are supposed to look like a wall. Very straightforward. Next, we need a hole. And let's look at the hole. The hole is a little bit more. So this is the obstacle that you fall into. So the hole just says is static, doesn't move either. Sensor makes it so things don't bounce off of it, but at least you know that you hit something. And then when a ball hits it, it tells the ball to reset. Really easy. And then what we can do is we can actually draw these out. So we need a couple holes here. Let's see. So I can put some holes, and we also need a ball. And when I run this, what I get is if the ball goes in the hole, then the ball gets reset, and everything runs. The ball actually like runs against the shape and sort of bends around and keeps on going in there. So this is actually like a lot of very, very simple components that from code, there's minimal code, very minimal code, a lot of like prepackaged stuff that I reuse over games. But basically, I can actually design pretty complex graphics and do other, I was having a good time. So this is still pretty traditional, pretty straightforward. And I wanted to do some sort of more complex things as well. Let me Oh, I actually put those, that's funny, I put those inside of the control template. And it still works, which is cool. But I really wanted like flippers. I wanted to make the game more dynamic, a little bit harder, and this is sort of like things get in the way, which is basically, this is still just a custom control that when you hit this thing, that it just bounces you back. And I designed a couple levels where it basically just bounces you right into the hole. But still, if you want like a really bulbous one, you can edit the template, you can restyle it, you can change like some of the brushes, stuff like that. I'll actually go back to a nice looking one. And if I wanted, we can do another flipper like over here. Let's see. They're styled, so if I want it to actually be facing in the other way, I actually have a flipper right to make it flip in the other way. So no code changes when I actually need to make two different variants of the same flipper. And we need to do a finish hole. So I'll look at another hole and finish hole. Now the code for this, it's actually fairly important to note that all of this stuff is lightweight. With the game, let's see. And I'll try to hit one of these flippers and have it, that one's going to sort of knock me into that hole. Maybe not. Whatever, you get the point. Let's look at what this finish hole actually looks like, or what the ball looks like. The ball is actually a pretty cool one. Ball is very straight, and I keep on hitting the wrong key. The ball is very straightforward. I actually defined some visual states. Kristen was showing visual states to actually change the UI. I use it a lot in games to actually say, like, when the ball goes into the hole, how does it go into the hole? It just runs the remove state. And once that remove state actually exits, then I set the ball back to its original position. And these are the methods that basically get called. Whenever you run into a hole, it gets reset. When you run into the finish hole, then it gets removed. And fairly minimal code here as well. And this way, and this is the actual level. So each of the levels actually subclasses from level. So when I'm designing these games, I do a lot of games on the side. I actually try very much to basically do separation so that I can replace the visuals. I can do a lot of iteration on visuals. I can really work on those, have a lot of flexibility independently of the code. So if I'm modifying code, I try to pick up as much from the visuals so that I can do things such as make an arc or make a flipper that completely resizes, and basically go through a lot of random game design level. For this game itself, basically I have a bunch of random levels. The game itself took about half a day to make, and then each level, I don't know, it usually takes me about 2 hours to put it together because it takes a little bit of time to sort of come up with like random ideas and position everything randomly. And I also do, I guess that's, some other thing. I got maybe a minute, so I'll actually show what's another fun one? So magnet. So I wanted some magnets that basically repel the ball and get you away and try and push you into a hole to sort of screw you up as well. I was just having a good time. Once you have the code, it's really easy to do. So all this code, I actually blogged this morning, the source code for this game. If you go up to my blog, and we'll have it, or actually, can we switch over to PowerPoint, other computer? And yeah, so actually all of the code for me is on my blog. So if you wanted to grab that code and make a random game, then
so,
yeah.
Can you switch? So what Pete showed was really interesting about that is that it's really possible by building a little bit of infrastructure, for example, with a developer, it's very, very easy to create an infrastructure that then lets designers basically create things without having to write more code. So with the infrastructure that Pete created, basically levels can be designed completely by a designer without actually needing to have any deep understanding of the code. And that's really a lot of where the power of Blend is, that it enables designers and developers to work together so that developers developers can do the part that they are good at, providing the real-world infrastructure that does things, but providing and exposing the things that the infrastructure does in such a way that designers can then take it and create great applications, great user experiences on top of it. We've been a little faster than we were when we were trying this session, so we actually have a few minutes for questions. And again, you see on the slide some information about how to contact us and for our various blogs, and of course, where you can download the Blend 4 beta. Just one extra bit of information. So if you want to do some development for Windows Phone, the Windows Phone bits are not part of the Expression Blend beta. They are separate downloads. So in order to develop for phone, you need currently 4 downloads. You need to download the preview tools for Visual Studio for the developer tools. You need the Expression Blend beta. You need the Expression Blend add-in for developing for Windows Phone, and a version of the Blend SDK for the phone. Sorry for the inconvenience. This will get simpler as we come towards release. But we thought it was more important for you guys to have it actually available to you than waiting a few more weeks and having it all packaged together. But it's all available. All the links are live. I checked them before this session. So please try it out and give us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. So, and again, we can take some questions. Yes? That would be good.
I think so, yeah.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm actually migrating from the Adobe suite over onto the Microsoft platform, and I was wondering if there was any sort of plans for a certified Adobe the Adobe certified expert, but I want that for the Microsoft Expression suite. So I wondered if there was anything in the works for that.
So, so are you asking about training resources, or are you asking for a certification program? So one program, I have to admit, I'm not 100% the best person to answer that. So we do have a program called the MVP program, the Most Valued Professional program, that is certainly a certification, but it doesn't involve actually a test in the product, but it has other criteria that you need to fulfill. And I think Arturo probably is a good person to give you more information on that. He's over there. Arturo, if you maybe can raise your arm for other people to see as well. Okay.
No, not right now was Doug's response. But it will happen someday.
For translation purposes.
Yes, for recording purposes.
Recording purposes, indeed. Yes?
So the path list box is really interesting, and I was just wondering what platforms in particular. Is it Silverlight only, or is there a WPF version out there?
No, the pathless box is supported on WPF and Silverlight. It's not currently supported for phone because it requires Silverlight 4 functionality, and the phone is not Silverlight 4. So in the future, maybe someday, but not today.
And so that's part of the new Blend SDK that you mentioned?
Correct, yes. So for explanation, basically Blend ships with an SDK that contains a few runtime components that we provide, such as things like path list box, our special shape controls. We have a special version of Visual State Manager that handles all these layout morphing transitions. And if you use these features inside of Blend, we basically add a DLL to your project that contains these things. And path list box is a component that is handled just in the same way. It's part of our SDK.
Testing. Hey, so I noticed that you were showing some really cool new shapes that were available inside of Blend.
Yes.
Is there now the availability to actually extend shapes and build your own custom shapes without making custom user controls? Because the shape class used to be sealed.
Nothing has changed in that, but we've done some work. Actually, Pete can maybe give some more details on that.
Yeah, we actually have some work to subclass. In Silverlight 4, you can subclass path, and you can set data. So that's what we do for quite a bit of it. But then some of the stuff is controls as well. So it's sort of a mix between the two. So you don't subclass shape, though, subclassing path. And that's a new Silverlight 4 change.
Yeah, and we also did some fun things. We actually added in our own implementation of that, actually, these little geometry effects for these things, so you can actually take one of these paths and actually convert it into a more sketchy looking path. So there's some fun things we can do with these shapes, but they are based on path.
Yep.
Okay, if there are no further questions, thank you very, very much for coming. We appreciate it and hope you have fun at MIX.